Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, we return to the Appalachian Trail, a path worn thin by footsteps that never finished, where trail markers shift, voices echo from wrong directions, and something patient waits beyond the last switchback. These 8 stories weren't shared around campfires. They were scrawled in shelter logbooks, buried with missing gear, or whispered by those who came back different. If stories like these keep you hiking after dark, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell us where you're listening from. Now zip the tent, kill the lantern, and listen close. The heat was still clinging to the trees like wet breath, even past 10 at night. The shelter appeared suddenly, crouched in the dark, like it had been waiting for me specifically. I stood there for a moment, just watching the open front and listening. Nothing moved. But something in me didn't want to go in first. I'm Caleb Danner, 29. I teach middle school science back in Morganton, North Carolina. This trip was supposed to be a clean break. Just me and the trail. No emails, no phone calls, no past. I started planning it the night I turned 29, when I realized I'd been living more cautiously than consciously. I used to joke with my students that hiking solo was my way of pressing mute on the world. But that wasn't really it. I liked the silence because it didn't ask me to explain anything. Not the breakup last year, not the panic attacks after, and definitely not why I started waking up some nights convinced I'd already disappeared. Out here, I didn't have to be a teacher, a son, or anyone's mistake. I just had to keep walking and sign the shelter logbooks, like a breadcrumb trail to prove I still existed. That night, I dropped my pack inside and let myself breathe. The place was typical: 3 wooden walls, slanted roof, splintery bench. A wasp circled lazily up near the rafters. On a shelf sat the logbook, cover swollen with age and dampness. I wiped my hands on my shorts and picked it up, flipping to the last page like I always did. There it was, in thick black ink. Caleb Danner, 29, stays here tonight. That is bread. I didn't write it. My name, my age, my exact phrasing, but I just arrived. My pen was still clipped to my pack strap, untouched. The ink was fresh, still darker than the others. I blinked, checked the page again, hoping I'd somehow forgotten signing it, but I knew I hadn't. I flipped back through the logbook, part tapping harder now. 2 more entries jumped out, same handwriting, same black ink. 2 nights ago, Caleb Danner, 29, stayed at Deep Gap. It's not chill. The night before that, Caleb Danner, 29, stayed at Sassafras Ridge. You should well. I had stayed at both those shelters. I just hadn't signed the book either time. Once I was too tired. Once it was raining hard. Somehow. Whoever this was knew not just my path, but my habits. I shoved everything back into my pack, hands moving faster than my thoughts. I didn't want to be there. Not with that name on that page. I stepped outside, intending to hike on, even just a mile or 2 to calm my head. That's when I saw it. On the trail sign outside the shelter, someone had scratched into the wood. Not carved. Scratched. Messy and fresh. Just 3 letters. Cal-L. No one on trail called me that. Not for years. Not since college. The last person who used it with any warmth wasn't in my life anymore. I stood there, breathing through my nose, pulse ticking louder in my ears. The forest felt too still. I turned back to the shelter. I told myself I was being paranoid. The trail ahead was rocky, and I didn't trust my ankles in the dark. I lay down on the bench without unpacking, boots still on, pack zipped tight against my chest. Just until dawn, I told myself, just a few hours of rest. It was sometime after midnight when I heard the first step. Dry leaves shifting, then another, then a third. Slow, steady, circling the shelter, not rushing, pacing. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then a whisper came through the open side. Page 4. Caleb. He won about a sender. The logbook was still at my feet. My hands moved before I could stop them. I flipped to page 4. Breath caught in my throat. There, in the same black ink, Caleb, 29, last night alive. That, it's not a Wilden whirl. I didn't think. I just ran. The logbook dropped somewhere behind me as I bolted into the trees. Flashlight beam, bouncing wildly over rocks and roots. My pack was half-zipped, swinging against my back. But I didn't stop to fix it. The only thought I had, loud and stupid and looping, was, get away from that voice. Behind me. The footsteps followed fast, no longer slow or deliberate, now crashing through the undergrowth with a rhythm that matched mine. I didn't dare look back. I knew the trail well enough by feel, but at night, even familiar ground turns hostile. My foot slipped once on a wet rock and my knee slammed into the dirt. I kept moving. I don't know how long I ran. Long enough for the trees to start blending together and my breath to come in ragged gasps. Then, through the blur of headlamp and sweat, I saw it, another lean-to shelter, smaller, older-looking, with a low stone fire ring and a broken gutter hanging off one side. I staggered toward it like it was a lighthouse. Inside, I collapsed against the back wall. My chest heaved. I waited for the sound of pursuit. Nothing. Just crickets and the hum of July night. My headlamp flickered. I reached back for my pack and felt the half-open zipper. My journal still inside. But the shelter logbook I'd grabbed in panic was gone. Maybe I dropped it. Maybe not. I wanted to believe it had all been some awful joke. Maybe another hiker who saw my name in a register and decided to screw with me. People do weird things when they're alone too long. I almost laughed. Nervous. Breathless. Not quite sane. Just a trick. I told myself. Just trail paranoia. That's when I noticed the shelf. There was another logbook. Different cover. Thinner. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't not. I opened it. The first page read, Cal, Werg, already here. That no so's way. That snapped something in me. I backed out of the shelter, nearly falling again. My beam jerked toward the trail, and that's when I saw him, crouched low, maybe 30 feet off, just where the trees started again. Pale face, wide grin. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms and face, catching on my shirt and pack straps. I didn't care. My legs were shot, lungs near bursting, but fear gave me something fuel can't. Behind me, I heard him crash through the brush. Closer now, faster than before. Too fast. Then the ground disappeared. I slid down a steep drop, gravel and roots tearing past me. Half fell, half rolled into a shallow ravine, landing hard on my side. My flashlight flew somewhere and blinked out. For a second, all I could hear was blood in my ears. Then, a hand, reaching down from above, fingers brushing the top of my pack. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I tore away, scrambled blindly into the creek bed at the bottom. Mud and stone under my hands, cold water soaking my knees. I moved until my legs gave out and I collapsed in the dark, heart punching against my ribs like it was trying to escape first. By dawn, I found a trail marker and followed it until I saw people. 2 day hikers with bright vests and plastic water bottles. I must have looked like hell. They thought I was dehydrated, maybe sleep-deprived. I didn't argue. I just drank what they gave me and followed them back to a parking lot like a lost dog. Later that week, a ranger emailed me. Said someone turned in a logbook found near the shelter I'd camped at. Last page had my handwriting on it. Same style, same pen. The entry read, Caleb Danner, 29. Stays here tonight. Work south. I haven't hiked since. Not even a day loop. But sometimes, when the house is too quiet, I get this strange feeling. Like someone just behind me is flipping through pages and stopping at the one they're waiting to write next. The woods felt softer in early June, like they hadn't yet decided whether to belong to summer. Mist hung low in the hollows, dissolving as the sun lifted above the ridge. Birds were loud, insistent, and the dirt under my boots was still damp from last night's rain. I wasn't rushing. I had no mileage goal, no itinerary, just a borrowed pack, a geocaching app on my phone, and the simple idea that finding small hidden things might distract me from the bigger, uglier ones in my head. My name's Jordan Lee, 35. Between jobs, which sounds cleaner than laid off in March and still scrambling. My friends back in Philly had laughed when I said I was going hiking. I'm not the type. I prefer air conditioning and a working coffee pot. But I needed distance. From screens, from people, from waiting for phone calls that weren't coming. I told myself if I couldn't get my life sorted, I could at least find a few caches along the Appalachian Trail. By 9 that morning, I'd already logged 4. They were the kind you expect. Film canisters tucked in rocks, little waterproof tubes, even one neat carved coin left behind by someone with more patience than me. I was ready to turn around when the app pinged. A 5th cache showed up on the map, but it wasn't like the others. No description, no user notes, no smiley faces from past hikers. Just a bare set of coordinates glowing on the screen, about a quarter mile uphill. Curiosity won. I left the trail and pushed through brush, grumbling as branches scratched my arms. My phone GPS stuttered in the canopy, but steadied enough to guide me up to a rotting stump. Wedged inside was a green ammo box, the kind I'd seen before but older. Paint flaking, metal dented. I pried it out and flipped open the latch. Inside lay 3 objects. A compass, needle spinning like it had lost its job. A photo of a man standing on a ridgeline, back turned, wearing a gray hoodie and faded jeans, and a folded scrap of paper. The note read, "This is not the 5th. Keep walking until you're behind yourself. Is shark." I laughed, but the sound came out thin. Whoever had planted this was going for creep factor. I shoved the box back in the stump and returned to the main trail, brushing dirt from my hands. But the compass needle was still spinning in my head. Back on the path, my phone screen jittered, the GPS arrow lurching sideways. I shook it, uselessly. Then I noticed something ahead. A man, standing at the next bend. Gray hoodie, faded jeans, same stance as the photo. I blinked and walked faster, but when I reached the bend, nothing. No man, just another ammo box. This one, leaning against a tree, as if someone had set it down seconds earlier. My mouth went dry. I crouched, opened the lid. Inside was a cracked mirror, shards held together by tape. Behind it, another note. Cache 3 again. You are out of order. He's actually what she would act as. I turned slowly, heart tripping. 50 feet back, along the section of trail I'd just walked, sat a 3rd ammo box. Plain as day. I hadn't seen it coming up. I didn't go back for it. I moved forward, faster now, heart racing, but trying not to sprint. Something about the boxes, their order, their timing, felt off. Like I wasn't just being followed, but misfiled. I started testing paths, loops, side trails, doubling back. Each time I paused to catch my breath or check my map, a new box appeared. Sometimes behind a tree, once in the middle of the trail, like it had always been there. I stopped checking them all, but the ones I did open weren't helping. One labeled Cache 12 had a broken toy inside, a plastic whistle shaped like a fox. Another, Cache 6, held a map of the section I'd already walked, but every turn was mirrored. Cache 0 had nothing but black sand inside, the kind that stuck to your skin like ash. The air around me hadn't changed, but I couldn't tell what time it was anymore. It felt like the trail wasn't stretching forward. It was folding in on itself. Eventually, I marked a tree with my knife, one deep slash across the bark. I sat beneath it, arms resting on my knees, and watched. 30 minutes passed. No movement. No new boxes. The forest went quiet in that way it sometimes does. Like the whole world takes a breath. I thought maybe whatever it was had stopped. Or maybe I'd stepped out of range. Then I glanced down. At the base of the tree, in the roots it'd been resting against, was another ammo box, smaller than the others. The latch was undone, the lid slightly cracked. I opened it with numb fingers. Inside, a single folded sheet of paper, my name written in block letters across the front. I unfolded it. There were coordinates. I checked them against my phone. They matched exactly where I was sitting. Something clicked then. It wasn't about distance or trail markers. The boxes weren't tracking where I was. They were tracking when I chose. Forks in the trail, moments of hesitation, backtracks, pauses. Every decision point, every internal argument about direction, had planted another box in the outcome. The more I second-guessed myself, the more ground I gave it to grow. So I stood up, turned 90 degrees off trail, and walked into the thickest brush I could find. No path, no decisions, just raw movement, branches slapping my face, thorns catching on my sleeves, spider webs brushing my cheeks. I didn't stop, didn't adjust, didn't pick between anything. And for the first time in hours, when I slowed, there was no box. When I returned to the trail, scratched and shaking, the sun was higher. A final cache sat dead center on the path. No tricks, no hiding, just sitting there, waiting. I opened it. Inside, a blank slip of paper. A second photo. Me, curled up in bed, asleep last night at my motel, taken through the window. Below it, a note written in my own handwriting. Don't make the same fifth choice. Redinen. It is not a Vrad Bake. I left the trail without looking back. I didn't log the hike. At home, when I opened the geocache app, it showed only 4 finds. The fifth, it wasn't in the public database. No logs, no photos. But last night, I opened my closet to grab a jacket, and there was an ammo box tucked into the back corner. I didn't open it. This morning, the box was gone. But on my fridge, written in smudged graphite, were 3 new words. Resetting. Choose again. 8. This was a cause. There's a kind of silence you only get at elevation. Wind swept. Open. Far from anything with a roof. That's what I felt as I crested the ridge that afternoon. Nothing around me but sky and soft green, rolling out in all directions. The bald was broad and round, like the back of a sleeping animal. Grass bending in the steady breeze. I paused to catch my breath and take in the view. It was exactly as I'd heard. Sharp sun, cool air, long lines of horizon stretching unbroken in every direction. I'm Lucas Dorn, 39. I do these loops alone, sometimes for days at a time. No dog, no partner, just me and the pack. I'd taken a week off to hike a section that crosses this bald in southern Virginia, supposedly one of the most scenic stretches south of the Smokies. I'd planned to camp just beyond the summit, in a sheltered patch of trees near mile marker 47. I'd studied the topography and the old guidebook photos, but none of them mentioned the stones. Dozens of them, thin, upright stones, maybe the size of firewood logs, driven straight into the grass. No plaque, no signs, no symmetry. They stood like markers, or perhaps memorials, but too many and too disordered to make sense. Some leaned slightly, others looked freshly placed. I assumed it was a local tradition, something folkloric, maybe an art thing. But when I pulled out the guidebook, flipping to the summit page, the photo showed only open grass. No stones. I kept walking. I told myself I was overthinking, but as I passed more of them, something began to bother me. They weren't random. Each one leaned just slightly, angled toward the next, like a crude arrow trail. I tested the theory, stood behind one, then the next, then the next. Sure enough, they aligned, pointing, leading. The trail of stones curved gently along the slope, taking me away from the main footpath. Not far, maybe a quarter mile. At the end stood a taller stone, waist-high and smoother than the rest. It had a carved groove down the middle, clean-edged, like someone had chiseled a narrow slot into it on purpose. The kind of slot meant to hold something. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, unsure whether I'd wandered into someone's private memorial or stumbled across something meant to be left alone. The wind had died. The air felt thinner. Too quiet. I turned to head back toward camp, and stopped. The light was off. Wrong. The sun hadn't set yet, but the sky had dimmed like dusk had jumped an hour ahead. I checked my watch. It was still early, but everything around me felt late. I looked back at the stones. They'd moved. No longer a line. They had reformed into a tight circle around the tall one, and I was standing inside it. I hadn't heard them move. I hadn't seen a thing. But I was surrounded. I stepped over the nearest stone without looking down. My boot cleared it easily, and nothing happened. No noise. No resistance. Just the rustle of grass and the sudden realization that the wind had picked back up, though I hadn't felt it return. I moved fast, keeping my eyes forward, resisting the urge to glance back at the circle. I didn't want to see whether the stones had shifted again. Once I dropped below the crest of the bald, everything felt more normal. Trees appeared again, scattered hardwoods first, then thicker stands of pine and laurel. I found a small clearing with enough flat ground to pitch my tent and enough trees to make me feel less exposed. I set up camp quickly, hands tight on every knot, checking and rechecking the stakes. The whole time, I kept expecting to hear footsteps, but the woods gave me nothing but the sound of my own movements and a few distant thrush calls. When I went to check my compass, the needle was turning slowly, never settling on a direction. I tapped it, still spinning. I checked my watch. It ran backwards for 10 seconds before freezing completely. I laughed. Too sharp. Too fast. Then turned the watch face down and shoved it into my bag. I didn't want to know what time it thought it was. I stayed awake, past dark, sitting cross-legged with my headlamp off and a trekking pole across my lap like it might be useful. Nothing happened. The sky cleared. A few stars blinked through the tree canopy. Eventually, exhaustion outweighed nerves. I crawled into the tent, zipped up, and closed my eyes. The wind woke me, not loud, but steady, like breath against the nylon wall of the tent, and something else. Clicking sounds, not sharp, but consistent. At first, I thought it was branches tapping each other in the breeze, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded rhythmic, deliberate. I unzipped the fly and peered out. High up, on the ridge above me, where the bald started again, I saw shapes, dozens of them, just visible in the faint starlight. Upright stones, standing exactly where they hadn't been before. The tall one was there too. They weren't moving, but they weren't gone. I didn't sleep after that. I waited until the first hint of light broke through the trees, then packed everything in 15 minutes and started down trail. My plan was simple. Keep heading downhill, put miles between me and that ridge, reach the trailhead by noon if I pushed hard. But every junction I followed, every spur trail, every switchback, I'd find myself circling, back to the bald, always back. By full daylight, I was back on top. The stones were there, waiting. This time, the tall one had something slotted into its groove. I didn't want to see it, but I walked up anyway. I didn't have to get close to recognize it. It was my knife. I hadn't touched it since dinner. It should have been zipped into my bag with the mess kit. I dropped my pack and checked. The knife pouch was open, empty. I reached for the blade in the stone, but my fingers stopped short. I couldn't move it. It felt embedded, like it had grown there. I backed up slowly. Behind me, the stones had reformed. A perfect circle, tight, complete. I was inside it again. The wind had calmed overnight, and morning light filtered through bare-limbed trees. Still holding on to that early spring chill, I unzipped the tent and stretched, stiff from 2 nights on rocky ground. Doug was already up, crouched over a small log with his back to me, packing deliberately. He wasn't a morning talker, but something in the way he held his shoulders struck me as more tense than usual. He kept glancing at his map like it had changed overnight. I'm Jay Mercer, 30. Mostly a weekend hiker, until this trip. Doug's 32, a little more experienced, a little more obsessive. We'd met through a local hiking group, bonded over weather apps and gear spreadsheets, and planned this 3-day loop through Shenandoah as our first longer outing. He liked routes and checklists. I liked letting someone else handle the logistics. When I asked where we were heading that morning, he didn't look up. "Same as yesterday," he said. "Bear Ridge campsite and a Saks." I blinked. "Doug, we camped at Bear Ridge last night. They were contentious." He didn't respond, just pointed to a red mark on the map. We packed and headed out anyway. Doug hiked in front, boots steady, poles tapping in rhythm. He said the next shelter was 2 miles away. I checked my GPS. Nothing matched. According to my phone, we were already there. I tried again. Different app. Same result. Meanwhile, Doug insisted we had half the day left to go. When I asked to see the map myself, he shook his head. "It's annotated for safety," he said, like I'd asked something unreasonable. We passed a stone outcrop with a dead tree at its peak. I stopped cold. I'd seen it the day before. I was sure of it. The angle, the lichen, the way the branches splayed like fingers. I pointed it out. "We haven't seen this yet," Doug said flatly, not even turning his head. By lunch, we sat on a log facing a small clearing. Doug pulled out trail mix. Same bag. Same twist tie I'd knotted for him the day before when he couldn't get it closed. I stared at it. "Is that the same bag?" I asked. Doug smiled. "Casual. You always say that." "There's not it." The way he said it, soft, amused, made my stomach twist. Always. This was our first 3-day hike. First time using this loop, but he said it like we'd had this conversation before. Like it wasn't his first time hearing it. That night, I pretended to sleep. Doug always passed out fast. Headlamp off. Zipped into his bag like nothing could touch him. Once his breathing settled, I eased up, unzipped his pack, and found the maps near the bottom, wrapped in a dry bag. There were 3. All the same paper. All in the same handwriting. Doug's, but the routes marked on them didn't match. One showed our original loop with Bear Ridge circled ahead. Another had it marked behind us, like we'd already passed it and were looping back. The third had no route at all. Just a red circle floating in the white space. No labels. No landmarks. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. My hand was shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from cold or something else. I zipped everything back up and lay awake until dawn. My plan was simple. Split. Follow my GPS out of the park. Call a ride at the trailhead, and let Doug do whatever Doug needed to do. But when I unzipped the tent the next morning, he was gone. Just a note folded on top of my pack. "Jay, went to refill water. Meet you at Bear Ridge." I should have been relieved. Instead, my gut went cold. The nearest water source was a 1/4 mile east. I walked there, careful not to rush. The stream bed was dry. Nothing but wet leaves and a shallow pool of mud. I turned to leave and caught something out of the corner of my eye. A strip of paper half buried in the muck. It was another map. Water damaged, edges curled. I wiped it off on my sleeve and unfolded it. This one was different. No route marked. Just 2 names. Jay and Doug. Circled in red. Side by side. And a date scrawled beneath them, in small, smeared pencil, April 15. Today was April 17. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, holding that soaked paper, listening to birdsong that didn't seem to belong to the morning anymore. I hiked back slowly, hoping stupidly that maybe Doug had returned to camp. He hadn't, so I waited. By twilight, I was still alone. I'd packed my things, ready to go, but something kept me rooted. Like if I left too early, I'd miss something I was supposed to understand. Then, just as the last light dipped below the ridge, I saw him, Doug, standing on the trail like he'd only stepped away for 5 minutes. He looked calm, maybe even at peace. He was holding a stick, like a cane, but his pack was missing. I didn't say anything. He spoke first. "Jay," he said gently, "what day is it for you?" "It is not 10. I told him. April 17. He nodded, like he'd expected that. Smiled faintly, almost sadly. Then this is the last day I get to see you. The September 4. He walked up slowly and handed me a folded sheet of paper. A single map. I recognized it immediately. It was the original one. The one we'd used on day 1. The paper was dry, untorn. I opened it. It was blank. No trail. No marks. Just white space. Like it was waiting for something. Or like everything we'd done had been erased. Doug didn't say another word. He turned and walked back up the trail without looking back. The trailhead was colder than it should have been. 38 degrees. Maybe less. And the kind of still air that makes your breath feel heavy. I started up the northern Georgia segment around 5:15 a.m. Headlamp on low. Boots steady. The switchbacks stacked along the slope like ribs. Narrow and sharp, with just enough drop between them to make you feel like you were working for it. I'd done this segment before, prepping for guided hikes. But today felt different. The dark wasn't the issue. It was the fog. It clung low, hugging the lower switchbacks like chimney smoke. Not mist. Mist floats. This was denser, grimier. Somehow, it didn't move when I passed through it. Just sat there, curling between tree trunks, holding the cold in place. As I climbed, I expected it to thin out. Instead, it stayed behind me, settled like a waiting thing, not chasing but tracking. I'm Mason Kell, 42. I guide small trail groups part-time, mostly families or beginners looking to say they did the AT. I was out here early to check conditions ahead of a weekend group trip. Blood Mountain by sunrise was the goal. Get up, get clear views, and be down before lunch. The climb was routine, but by switchback 4, I stopped. There was something hanging from a tree limb just above eye level. A hiking bell, rusted and old, dangling on 2 mismatched shoelaces knotted together. It swayed slightly in the still air, not from wind, but weight. I hadn't seen it before, and no one used bells anymore. Not in Georgia. They were more superstition than safety these days. And this one looked like it had been hanging there a while. I kept moving, trying not to dwell on it. Just a weird remnant. Maybe someone left it years ago and forgot. 10 minutes later, I reached another bend. My headlamp caught metal again. Same tree, same bell, same knots. I stared at it longer this time. The bark was the same, and a branch I'd noticed with a missing tip was still missing. But my GPS said I'd move forward. Terrain gain, 240 feet. Trail mileage, up by 0.3. It didn't match. Nothing matched. I descended to cross-check. Maybe I missed a junction, but the fog below was thicker now, coagulated, almost, and the ground had changed. Softer, like wet wool. The trail still followed the same zigzag, but the tension in my legs felt wrong. I hiked faster. At switchback 6, I saw footprints, fresh, clear boot prints in the mud. My size, my tread. They led forward for a few paces, then veered off trail toward the cliff edge. I should have stopped. I didn't. I followed the prints until they ended right at the edge of the fog line. And from just below that low curtain of gray, I heard breathing. Exactly like mine. I backed away slowly, eyes on the edge, where the prints ended, where the fog clung just above the drop like it was thinking. I didn't wait to hear that sound again. I turned and climbed, hard, pushing through switchbacks 7 and 8 like they might carry me out of something I couldn't name. My quads burned. My breath caught. Behind me, the fog crept upward, not drifting, not rising like weather, but stretching, as if it were aware of the incline and didn't like being left behind. The trees changed above switchback 8. I recognized the bend in the ridge, the arrangement of exposed roots, the slab of stone that jutted out just wide enough to sit. I'd been here 2 days ago on a solo scouting run. It had felt normal then. Open sky, solid ground, views all the way east. Now, I sat with my pack between my knees, trying to slow my heart, and pulled out the topo map. What I saw made no sense. The switchbacks were numbered, as they should be, but not in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 5, 7. My pen marks from previous hikes were still there, circled in blue. But they didn't match my memory of the climb. Sections had moved. Loops had swapped places. One even crossed itself in a way I knew the trail physically couldn't. I scanned the trailhead stamp. Same trail, same date. But the elevation lines felt wrong, like someone had redrawn the slope. I almost laughed. Almost. But then came the crack. Not a branch breaking. Something deeper. Lower. I turned fast and saw a portion of the trail near Switchback 5 collapsing. Not from weight. From underneath, like the dirt had been scooped out. Fog poured upward through the opening like it had been waiting underground. I grabbed my pack and ran. Uphill. Past 8. Toward what should have been 9 but didn't exist on the map. As I moved, the trail shifted beneath me. Roots writhing loose. Gravel rolling downhill in slow waves. Like the trail itself didn't want me escaping. I swore out loud, not knowing who I was yelling at. Every step forward felt like an argument. At the final ridge before the summit shelter, the trail split. One side collapsed completely. The other barely held together by roots and prayer. I jumped, heart in my throat. The ground cracked behind me just as I cleared the gap. Something, fog or cold or both, whipped past my back like a hand brushing too close. I didn't stop. I didn't check behind me. I made it to the shelter and collapsed just past the threshold. I must have passed out. When I came to, a volunteer was leaning over me with a mylar blanket and a confused look. He said I'd stumbled in around 10 a.m., mumbling about switchbacks and wrong numbers. My GPS looked fine, elevation normal. But the track log, it had drawn a spiral, a single line, looping tighter and tighter before spitting out at the top like a funnel. No switchbacks, no trail markers, just one long descent going up. Back home, I unpacked my gear 2 days later. I found something at the bottom of my pack I hadn't put there. The rusted bell, tied with 2 muddy shoelaces. The heat was flat and heavy by mid-morning, pressing down on the trail like a hand holding its breath. July in the Tennessee highlands could be cruel that way. No wind, no clouds, just sweat pooling at the base of my spine as I hiked uphill. I passed mile marker 342 right before lunch. A small metal post set off the trail's edge, just after a gap in the ridgeline. I took a photo next to it, like I'd done with every major marker since the first morning. Not for social media, just for my own record. Small milestones, clean sky behind me, proof of progress. I'm Avery Cole, 28. I sell books online out of a converted storage unit, which means my summers are slow, quiet, and mostly mine. I hike because I like the silence, the sense that forward movement always means something. I'd planned this 4-day solo loop through the Tennessee stretch of the AT down to the ounce. Maps printed, mileage checked, food bag weighed. Day 3 was supposed to be the hardest climb, but the clearest route. I knew where I was going. About half an hour later, I saw it again. Another marker. Same metal, same size, crooked at the same angle. Mile marker 342. I stopped and laughed out loud. Probably a mistake. Old post someone forgot to pull. I pulled up the first photo, expecting the same scuffs, same bolt pattern, but it wasn't. The lettering was cleaner. The post itself had no rust. It was the same number, but not the same sign. I kept going. Trees shifted slightly, but the ridge stayed familiar. I checked my GPS, still showing northbound progress. Mile 343, 344, 2. The signal wasn't great, but it was stable. Still, when I rounded a bend an hour later, there it was again, mile marker 342. Fresh paint, planted deep in packed dirt like it had never been moved. I stopped cold, stared at it long enough for the sweat on my back to go cold. I walked forward, slow now, testing my own sense of distance. The next few bends were uneventful, but then I noticed something else. Footprints. Muddy. Uneven. Matching my tread pattern exactly. But not mine. Not following me. Offset. Like someone had been walking a few steps behind. And slightly to the side. It made the trail feel narrow in a different way. Not because of the slope, but because it suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. Near the top of a long ridge, I spotted a primitive stone shelter. Just a low wall and half a fire ring. Collapsed at one side. No signage. No plaque. But clearly built by someone who expected to be there longer than a lunch break. I stepped inside, just to breathe out of the sun. That's when I saw the red handprint, smeared across the largest stone, like someone had leaned into it on their way out. In the dry grass near the wall was a note, crumpled and browned by weather. I unrolled it carefully, squinting to read the faded ink. Keep going, but stop believing yourself. Thanks for watching. I read it twice. Then I folded it into my pocket and kept walking. I doubled my pace. Not in panic, just urgency. Something about that note sat wrong in my pack. Like its weight had changed the slope of my stride. I wanted to reach the next known landmark before dusk, even if I had to push harder than planned. But no matter how long I walked, the trail refused to resolve into anything new. The terrain bent and curved, but never turned. I checked my GPS again. The numbers were worse now. Mileage shrinking, not growing. According to the tracker, I was moving backward, but I hadn't turned around. I left markers. Twigs broken at eye level. Ribbon from my med kit tied to a branch. When I circled back out of doubt, none of them were there. Not snapped. Not missing. Just never placed at all. The trail ahead still looked right. Sunlight angling west. Same ridgeline curve. But each time I passed another post, it read the same. Mile marker, 342. I camped that night beside a dry stream bed. More out of ritual than hope. The air had cooled, but not enough to settle me. I cooked, ate, and opened my journal. Wrote everything. Not just notes, but statements. July 26. Mile 344. 6:40 p.m. and to be. Like I was trying to notarize reality. Before bed, I took a flat river stone, scratched the same details into it with my multi-tool. If I woke up and forgot, the stone would still be there. At dawn, the light came slow and cold. I crawled out, walked to the stone. The etching had changed. Same hand, same tool marks. But the numbers weren't mine anymore. July 24. Mile 342. I stared at it so long my knees locked. Then I grabbed my pack and started walking again. No breakfast. North. South. I didn't care. I just wanted new. Hours passed. Shadows shifted. Sometime around noon, I hit another post. Leaning slightly, shadowed by a crooked pine. Mile marker, 342. But this one was different. The dirt around its base looked disturbed. Looser, like something had been buried. I dropped to my knees and dug with my hands. Nails black with soil. Wrists cramping. Breath short. After a few minutes, my fingers scraped metal. I pulled out my multi-tool. The one I thought I'd lost 2 days ago. My name was etched on the handle. I'd done that months ago with a soldering iron. Next to it was another note. Fresh. Folded twice. To escape the loop, one version must stop walking, then just stand debris. I sat there, dirt-caked, heart pounding. I understood. The trail wasn't broken. I was the echo, or one of them, each loop spawning a new attempt, each version of me walking the same track, thinking this time would be different. The choice wasn't forward or back. It was stop or continue, stay and mark the end, or keep walking and risk becoming the next misplaced copy. I took the multi-tool, pressed it back into the dirt, packed it tight. I dropped my pack beside it, everything I carried, everything that told me who I was. Then I stood, shoulders light for the first time in days, and walked away without looking back. I was found later, near a trail access road, by a day hiker with a neon pack and too much sunscreen. They said I looked sunstruck. that I'd been murmuring numbers under my breath. I hadn't eaten in nearly 36 hours. Weeks later, I got a message from someone on the trail crew. A photo. They'd been rerouting a section near mile marker 342. Found a flat stone in the dirt, scratched with a name. Cole. Version 2. The trees didn't sway, even with the wind threading through them. They just stood, tall, gray, waiting. Snow was thin, but persistent, spread like a half-finished erasure across the trail. My boots left clean impressions with every step, crunching over patches of ice too dry to melt underfoot. I moved steadily, not fast, not slow. Dusk was setting in behind the ridge, flattening everything into one dull palette: ash sky, slate, ground, stripped birch. I'm Rhett Lawson, 46. I used to walk into burned-out houses for a living. Retirement didn't stick. Not really. But I'd picked up winter hiking as a kind of habit. Fewer people, fewer distractions, fewer questions. March was perfect. Cold enough to thin the crowds. Warm enough to avoid frostbite if you move smart. I was 2 nights into a solo stretch north of Hot Springs, headed toward a backcountry shelter tucked just above a switchback in the timberline. Around 5:15, I passed a closed junction, one of those spur trails the rangers rope off for the season. No prints, no tracks, not even animal sign. I stopped to sip water, checked the time, and kept moving. Then I saw it. Through the trees. Not fire, not a flashlight, just a pale blue glow. Low to the ground. Steady. I stopped again. Squinted. It didn't flicker. Didn't pulse. Just hovered there. Maybe 20 yards off the trail. I moved slowly, cautious out of habit, and lifted one trekking pole to wave it in front of the glow. Nothing changed. No reflection. No shadow. I stepped sideways so my pack should have blocked the light entirely. Still there. Still color, but it didn't light anything up around it. I bushwhacked in carefully, weaving through rhododendron and frozen brush. The glow was close now, low and faint, like a TV left on mute in a dark room. I reached the spot, maybe 10 feet away, and as soon as I stepped forward, it vanished. No dimming, just gone, like someone cut the wire. I stood there a minute. No heat, no sound, just cold air and the dry burn of exertion in my lungs. I walked back to the trail, chalked it up to fatigue, or maybe ice crystals refracting something behind the ridge. I'd seen plenty of odd things in my life. Steam behaving like smoke, metal glowing from nothing but memory. This wasn't the first strange light I'd run toward, just the first one that seemed to know it. 20 minutes later, I saw it again, ahead of me this time, higher up, closer to where the trail curved out of sight. My phone was still warm enough to use, so I snapped a photo. The screen went white, locked for a second, then rebooted. When it came back, my GPS app had reset. It thought I was still parked at the trailhead. No service, no cache, no breadcrumb trail. As I climbed, the light disappeared again, same as before, right when I approached. But when I reached the shelter near 6:30, it was waiting. Inside, not centered, not glowing out from the back wall, just there, along one side, barely touching the floor like it had settled in for the night. I crept closer. My boots barely made a sound against the packed dirt. The glow moved, not out the door, not upward, just to the side, like something had slid away from me, slipping out of view. I stepped fully inside. No one. Just 3 walls, a half-rotted bench, and cold. Except the rear wall was warm, not steaming, not hot, but warm to the touch, like it had held something close, something that hadn't cast a shadow. I stepped back from the wall and stood in the doorway, trying to decide if I'd hallucinated the warmth. The air outside bit at my ears, but the inside of the shelter stayed a few degrees above the rest of the world, like the whole structure was breathing faintly. I didn't want to sleep there, even with the roof, even with the walls, so I pulled my tarp out, rigged it low beside the shelter in a pocket of frozen brush, and settled in under the sky. Every instinct I had said to go downhill, to get lower and out. But something was wrong with direction itself. When I tried descending through the tree line, moving quickly, staying on the larger blazes, the glow returned. Always just ahead. Always a little to the left. Not closer, but positioned, as if it had been waiting to intercept. I backed off, climbed back up. The light vanished. Gone like a switch. I did this 3 times. Same result. Eventually, I sat under the tarp, ate a cold protein bar, and forced myself to journal. I wrote everything I'd seen, not for proof, but for memory, timestamps, temperatures, direction, anything that might keep me rooted. The wind had picked up, but it wasn't cutting like before. If anything, it felt warmer, like I'd been pulled into a different current. By 2:30 a.m., I was finally slipping into uneasy sleep. At 2:37, I woke to the blue light. Soft, diffused, not next to me, under me. The glow bled through the ground sheet of the tarp, like the earth itself had turned translucent. I rolled away fast, boots scrambling, poles dragging. The light surged upward, no longer soft, but a defined column, narrow and human tall. No flicker or source, just color. Standing there, I swung with my trekking pole, reflex kicking in. It connected, not air, not vapor, resistance, like striking compacted snow that held shape too long. The vibration rang up my arm, numbing my fingers instantly. The light held form another second, then shimmered, broke apart, and began to rise again. Slower this time. I ran. Didn't pack, didn't check direction. I plunged down the slope, half sliding, half crashing through brush and slick roots. Ice caught my boots. Branches tore at my jacket. Behind me, the light followed partway down, always keeping height advantage. Never rushing. I hit a tree gap, narrow enough to squeeze through sideways, and stumbled out the other side. The glow didn't follow. It hovered at the edge, just beyond the narrow tree trunks, pulsing once, faintly, before fading, not retreating, just disappearing again, like it didn't need to chase what it already had. I kept going, half crawling until the terrain evened out into what looked like an old game trail. The snow deepened, then thinned. By first light, I reached a fire road. No glow, no sound, just numb toes and lungs that felt like I'd breathed too much metal. My boots were burned on the soles. Not scraped, not melted, burned. I hadn't been near fire, not since breakfast the day before. Back home, weeks later, I looked up local trail notes, old posts, weather logs, anything. I found a forum archive from 2009. One entry, deleted user, no replies. Blue ghost light at Snow Tunnel Ridge. Avoid trail split pass marker, 213. Never cast shadow. Avoid eye contact. It is not now. The forest felt more open than it should have. Too much sky, too few leaves. It was early November. That part of autumn when the trees give up for good and the trail turns into a crunching ribbon of brown. I hit the scarred section just past 3:30. I remembered this part. Even after 10 years, the way the slope angled west, the rocks half sunken into ash-colored dirt. The fire had gutted it back then, and though the worst damage had healed, you could still smell something scorched when the wind shifted. I'm Naomi Foster, 31, and this wasn't my first time on this stretch of trail. I thru-hiked in my early 20s, or tried to. Got as far as Central Virginia before a wildfire shut down half the ridge access and pushed me off trail. Life kept going after that. Jobs, rent, people. But part of me always tracked the miles I hadn't walked. So now I was back. Older and steadier. Trying to pick up where I left off. Finish the line. Fill the gap. The woods here didn't make much noise. No bird song. No insects. Just the soft sound of my boots pressing into dry leaf litter. and the occasional creak from a tree that hadn't quite decided whether to fall. I moved steady, watching for unstable ground where the old roots had burned out. The air had that cold shoulder feel of a day losing its light. About an hour in, I crested a small rise and paused. That's when I saw it. Someone standing between two charred oaks down the slope. Not walking, not hiding, just standing. Same posture I remembered taking when I first saw the fire line 10 years ago. Left side toward the trees. Hands low. Same red flannel I was wearing now. Tied loose at the waist. I blinked. Gone. No sound. No movement. Just empty space. I told myself it was a memory echo. Some trick of the brain conjuring a younger version of me into a scene that still knew how to hold it. But then I saw the boot prints. Not deep, but distinct. Pressed into a patch of soft ash beyond where the figure had been. Same tread as mine. Same size. And just a half step off my path. Like someone had walked beside me, but slightly behind. I kept moving, but something had shifted. The trail started to feel too familiar. Pre-walked, like I was catching up to something instead of exploring. I passed a snapped branch lying exactly where I remembered stepping on one years ago. Then a crumpled protein bar wrapper half buried under a stone I knew I'd flipped back then. At first, I thought, coincidence. Then I reached a stretch of trail with an old beech tree on the right. My initials, carved into the bark a decade ago with a cheap folding knife, were still there. Fresh, not weathered, not faded. The cuts looked clean, like I'd made them last week. I started looking over my shoulder, not because I heard anything, but because I kept catching glimpses of someone behind me. Never moving, never walking. Just being in the exact spots I remembered pausing years ago. The flat stone, where I'd checked my map. The trail bend, where I took my boots off to air out. It felt like I was following myself. Near the ridge crest, I stopped again. A faded wooden map was nailed to a post at a trail junction. Same one I remembered using back then. I stood reading it, trying to steady my breathing, when the weight of attention settled on me. I turned, 50 feet back. Someone stood in the middle of the trail. Same posture, same clothes, same burn scar on the left hand. Mine. I stepped off the trail, heart hammering, and moved toward the figure with more anger than fear. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some sick joke. Maybe someone who looked almost like me. But as I moved, so did she. One step back for every step I took forward. Her motion mirrored mine exactly. Same leg, same shift of the shoulders. Even the faint twist of the head I used to do when I hiked in cold air. I picked up speed, trying to break the rhythm. She matched me. Then the trail curved in a way it hadn't before. A tighter bend, like the path had folded in on itself. When I rounded the switch, the figure was gone, but I was standing in front of the same old map post again. My own footprint sat in the dirt, fresh, and pointed the wrong way. I hadn't gone in a circle. I'd looped through something else. I climbed higher, trying not to look back. Near the top of the ridge was a raised camp platform I remembered reading about but never used. I threw my gear down, lit a small fire in the pit ring, and sat close to it. Watching the trees, everything around me was still. No footsteps, no wind. I told myself I was just folding old memories into new ones. That being here again after 10 years was bending my sense of time. I sat on a flat rock beside the fire, trying to warm my legs. That's when I heard the whisper. Not from the woods, not even from behind me. From beneath me, just two words, low and dry. Don't step. Dame's a frightener. I stood up fast. Breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. There was nothing there, just rock, scorched leaves, and cold ash. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Everything was darkening. Shadows stretched out, long and angled wrong for the time of day. I backed toward my pack, reaching for my headlamp. Then something moved to my left. A figure lunged. Same height, same build. Red flannel flaring, but there was no noise. No weight in the step, just a blur of motion too smooth to be human. I jumped sideways out of instinct. Shoulder hitting a tree trunk hard. The figure passed through the spot I'd been standing, then vanished mid-step. No fade, no sound. Just gone, like smoke sucked back into a chimney. I didn't wait. I grabbed what I could, pack half zipped, one glove missing, and ran. Down the slope, through the trees, past the ridgeline and into thicker brush. My lungs burned. My legs caught on roots and sharp rock. I didn't care. When I reached the next lean-to, it was just after full dark. I collapsed inside, breathing too hard to speak if someone had been there, but it was empty, silent. Above the main beam of the shelter, someone had carved something into the wood. The words were jagged, old but not faded. If you see yourself, you're too late. Done now. I sat there, back against the wall, trying to slow my thoughts. Eventually, I peeled off my damp flannel and hung it from the side of my pack to dry. That's when I noticed. The left sleeve was gone, torn clean, like it had never been sewn there at all. I didn't set out to hike the Appalachian Trail to find myself or any of that. I just wanted to go quiet for a while. No phones, no inbox, no people asking if I was okay in that careful tone that meant they didn't really want the truth. Just miles and miles of old dirt and leaf rot, and the steady rhythm of my boots. By the second week, the trail had taken on a kind of rhythm. Wake with the light, boil water, pack up, walk until your legs throb and your brain stops churning. That's what I wanted most. To stop thinking about all the stuff I left behind. My name's Jess, 34. Used to work in legal finance until I burned out hard and said no more. Quit my job, ended a bad relationship, and booked the section hike I'd been daydreaming about for years. It felt dramatic at the time. Now it just felt necessary. That morning, I'd crossed into a quieter stretch in North Carolina. The trees were tighter there, the air thick with fallen leaves and moisture. No hikers for 2 days. Not even a squirrel until late afternoon. I remember the silence because it was the first time it didn't feel comforting. I saw the thermos just past a dry creek bed. Old stainless steel, scratched up and dangling from a nail in a crooked tree. Looked like someone had left it there as a joke or maybe a marker. I almost walked past it. Then curiosity pulled me close. It wasn't the thermos itself that got me. It was the way it hung so deliberately, like it was meant to be noticed. I checked it. Empty. Just dry inside. Dusty. Smelled faintly of ash. I left it and kept walking. If you're not from around here, you should know. People don't leave useful things behind on purpose. Out here, if something's abandoned, there's a reason it stayed behind. The trail teaches you that. I made camp near an old lean-to shelter by the ridge. Nothing fancy. Just a few stone walls and a half-collapsed roof. It was dry, though, and my feet were killing me. I boiled rice and beans, watched the sun bleed out over the ridgeline, and felt almost human again. Almost. That night, I heard something, just a faint sound, like a clink of metal. I figured it was a raccoon going through my cook pot. When I looked, nothing was there, not even paw prints in the soft dirt. Next day, somewhere around midday, I froze mid-step. There, leaning against a mossy rock outcrop, was the same damn thermos. Same dents. Same scuffed bottom. I know what you're thinking. Could have been another, just like it. But no. I remembered the spot of rust near the hinge and the faint ring where the sticker used to be. I didn't touch it this time, just stared for a long minute, then moved on. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Trail tricks. Things repeating in a place that never really changes. That's how I explained it to myself. For a while. Later that night, I made camp again. A little off trail. No shelter this time. Just my tarp and sleeping roll. Fog rolled in early, making the trees look like shadows with teeth. The fire kept going out, even though everything I used was dry. Let me tell you something about the woods when you're alone. They don't echo right. Sounds come in close and don't always leave. You hear something behind you and can't tell how far or how near it really is. At some point after midnight, I heard a soft noise, a kind of placing sound, like something being gently set down outside my tarp. I held my breath, listened for movement. Nothing. In the morning, sitting right at the edge of my tarp, was my old trail journal. I knew it on sight. I'd buried it with some trash back in the first week. Miles and miles behind me. Pages still damp from where I'd tried to burn the corners. It was open to the last thing I wrote before I tossed it. You always carry more than you need. That's what it said. A line my ex used to tell me. A line I hadn't written down. I didn't break camp right away. Just sat there staring at it. Heart pounding like it wanted out of my ribs. Fog still clung to the tree trunks like cobwebs. My boots felt too tight, like they were holding something in instead of supporting me. That evening, I spotted a flicker of firelight off trail, far enough to make me think I was imagining it. It pulsed once, then again. No smoke, no sound. I dug out my binoculars, heart thudding hard now. Through the lenses, I saw it clearer. A single flame, steady, no figure, no movement, just the firelight, floating still between two trees. When I lowered the binoculars, the thermos was sitting at my feet. I didn't scream, didn't run, just stared at the thermos for a long minute, like if I looked hard enough, the world would snap back into place. But it didn't. Nothing moved, not even the wind. I packed fast, tossed food in at odd angles, forgot to check for tent stakes, left the tarp poles behind and didn't care. I just needed to move, to get back on trail and keep moving until my brain could make sense of things again. The trail narrowed quick that way. Brambles reached at my sleeves, tore at my ankles. My breath came sharp, loud in the trees. I didn't look back, not once. I kept the compass steady east, which should have taken me toward a main junction. But after an hour, the ground dipped where it shouldn't have. Then the trail bent sharp around a ridge I didn't remember. It wasn't on my map. I tried to tell myself it was just poor navigation. Panic does weird things. But the woods didn't feel the same. The quiet was heavier now, like the trees were holding their breath. Somewhere after mile 10, I stepped wrong on a wet rock. My foot went out. My knee twisted hard and I hit the ground with a grunt that emptied me out. Pain flared down my shin and throbbed dull behind my eyes. I wrapped the ankle with the last of my elastic bandage. Could still walk, just not fast. The sun dipped lower through the branches. Light fell sideways, long and gold. My water was low. My nerves were worse. That is when I saw the split trail. Narrow, like it hadn't been used in seasons. Barely wide enough for one boot at a time. But something about it felt possible, like a way out. For a minute, I thought I was in the clear. I wasn't. The path opened into a clearing with an old ranger cabin tucked against the slope. The roof sagged on one side, but the door was still whole. No padlock, no signs of life, just the kind of quiet that felt earned. Inside was dry, musty, but not bad. I found a cot, an old shelf with canned beans and a bottle of iodine, a few logs by a rusted stove. My hands shook as I lit the fire. That flicker of warmth settled something in my chest. I stayed in that cabin for hours. Ate, rewrapped the ankle, sat by the fire until my eyes started to drift. There was a notebook on the shelf above the stove. A small one, blue cover. I hadn't noticed it before. I opened it. The pages were blank. All of them. But the paper felt warm, not from the fire. Just warm, like it had been held recently. I curled up on the cot. The wind had picked up outside. The fire crackled soft. For the first time in 2 days, I believed maybe it was over. In the dark, I waked to breathing. Slow, rhythmic, just behind me. I freeze. Not my breath. I don't move. I don't even blink. Just listen. It comes again. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Close. Too close. I spin fast, a heart slamming in my throat. No one. Nothing. The room is empty. But the fire is out, and the notebook is open now. Pages filled, covered in tight handwriting that looks like mine. I pick it up with shaking hands. My name is written over and over. Then lines I never wrote. You can't leave it behind. Is Adurin. You always carry it. They should be 5 tasks. It walks with you. There's the self. That's when I stop pretending it was nothing. I don't think. I just move. Grab my pack. Limp. Fast for the door. Something shifts in the shadows near the stove. Not a sound. Not a shape. Just movement. Like breath turns solid. I'm out the door. Boots hitting frozen ground. Fog curling low through the trees. I don't look back. Not this time. The trail is steeper than I remember. My ankle screams every step. Something is behind me. Not walking. Just matching. Every step. Branches break. To my right, then to my left. I swing wide. Grab a tree for balance. And that is when something grabs the back of my pack. Hard. I wrench forward with everything I've got. The strap tears loose. I stumble. Crawl. Push back to my feet. Keep running. I find a junction marker. One I remember from day 3. I slam my hand against the post. Look back. Nothing. But the thermos is sitting at the base of the marker. They found me the next day, curled under the ranger station's side stairs, dehydrated, barefoot, clutching the thermos like it was a lifeline. I don't remember packing it, but it was mine. Inside, wrapped tight in a bandana, was my old work ID, warped, burned around the edges. To this day, I don't hike, I don't camp, and I never carry more than I need.